Thoughts of our Divine Mother from the book The Mother by our Lord Sri Aurobindo, with the comments of the Mother of 1954, comments on chapter 4 on the Mother book by our Lord, page 164. Question: how can one merge oneself, one's separative ego, in the divine consciousness? That's a question by a child. For this, the Divine Mother asks, how can one merge in the divine consciousness? Then the child says, one separative ego. I don't understand what you mean by merge. The child says, in the divine consciousness. Then mother says, yeah, that's what I mean. How can one dissolve? You mean dissolve in the divine and lose one's ego? First of all, one must will it. And then one must aspire with great perseverance, and at each time the ego shows itself, it must be given a little rap on the nose. One must rap it. And then mother taps her nose until it has received so many raps that it's tired of them and gives up the game. But usually, mother says, instead of rapping it on the nose, one must justify, or one justifies its presence most of the times. Almost constantly, when it shows itself, one says, after all, it's all right. And mostly, one doesn't even know that it is ego. One thinks it is oneself. But the very first condition is to find it essential not to have the ego any longer. One must really understand that one does not want it. It is not so easy. For one can very well turn words over the head and say, I don't want the ego, I want only the divine and don't want to be separated from the divine. All goes on inside like that, but it remains there. It hasn't much effect on your life. The next moment you do something purely egoistic, you see, find it quite natural. It doesn't even shock you. One must first begin to understand truly what this means. The first method, you see, there are many stages. First, one must try not to be selfish, which is something quite different, isn't it? If you take the English words and you understand the difference. In English, you say the word selfish and the word ego. It exists in English, but these are the two different things. In French, this is not a distinction. They say, I don't want to be a selfish man, you see. But this is a very small thing, very small. People, when they stop being selfish, think they have made tremendous progress. But it is a very small thing. It is simple. It is simply to have a sense of its ridiculous. You can't imagine how ridiculous these selfish people are. When one sees things or sees them thinking all the time about themselves, referring everything to themselves, governed simply by their own little person, placing themselves in the center of the universe and trying to organize the whole universe, including God, around themselves as though they were the most important thing in the universe. If one could only see oneself objectively, as one sees oneself in a mirror, observe oneself living as it is so grotesque, and mother starts laughing. That's enough for you too. One suddenly feels that he's becoming so absolutely ridiculous. I remember I read it in French. It was a translation, a sentence of Tagore's, which amused me very much. He was speaking of a little dog. He said he compared it with something. I don't remember the details, but what it struck me was this. The little dog was sitting on the mistress' lap and fancying itself the center of the universe. This struck me very strong. It's true. I used to know a little dog like this, but there are many like that, almost like that. You see, they want everybody to pay attention to them, and in fact, they succeed very well, because when there is a little dog, as when there is a little child, it is almost the same. Everyone wants them to be attended to. Everyone attends to them as well. Haven't you noticed that? When a child of this height, mother indicates the height, comes along, everything else stops, because people could speak, say interesting things, be busy with something higher. But as soon as a child comes in along, everybody begins to smile, to mimic a baby, try to make it speak, to attend to it. One can't bring along a child without everybody fussing over it, wanting to take it, wanting to make it to speak. So naturally the child feels itself the center of the universe. It is quite natural. For a puppy, it is the same thing. For a kitten, it is the same. It is a kind of a poor deformation of a kind to protect something that is smaller than oneself. This is one of the forms, one of the earliest forms of unegoistic manifestation of the ego. It feels so comfortable when it can protect something busy itself with something more smaller, weaker than itself. It is almost like as it is a mercy, even entirely, which has no power to resist. And so on, feels good and generously because one does not crush it. This is the first manifestation of generosity in the world. But all this, when one can see behind it and a little above it, cures you from being selfish. For truly, it is ridiculous. It is truly ridiculous. It's a very long way that you have to go before merging one's ego into the divine's ego. Mother says, merge one's ego in the divine, but first one can't merge one's ego in the divine before coming completely individualized. Before becoming completely individualized, we cannot merge into the divine, says the mother. Do you know what it happens to be completely individualized? Mother asks, then says, mother's again asking, capable of resisting all your outer influences? Then there's a silence, and then mother says, some days ago I received a letter from someone who told me that he was very resistant or hesitant about reading the books of ordinary literature, for example, novels or dramas, because his nature had almost an insuperable tendency to receive imprints of the characters in this book, to begin feeling, living the feelings and thoughts of these characters and nature of these persons. There are many other people that one would think and who are like that. When they read a book, while they're reading it, they feel within themselves all kind of emotions, thoughts, desires, intentions, plans, even ideals. They are simply just absorbed in the reading of the book. They are not even aware of it, because at least 99% part of the individual's character are made up of a soft butter, inedible of course, but on which if one presses one's thumb, an imprint is made. Now everything is a thumb, an expressed thought, a sentence read, an object looked at, an observation of what one else does, and of one's neighbor's will. And all these wills, when one sees them, they are all there like this intermingled. Mother intercrosses her fingers and shows, each one trying to get the upmost, causing a kind of perpetual conflict within, outside. It goes on, in and out of people, you see, like electric currents. One is not aware of this at all. It is a perpetual conflict of all the wills which is trying to express himself or themselves, and the strongest one will succeed. But as there are as many of this, one has to fight alone against a great number. It is not easy. So one is tossed like a cork on the waves of the sea. One day one wants this, the next day one wants that. One moment is pushed from this side, another at that side, and one lifts one's face to the sky. Mother makes a gesture of the moment. One is sunk deep in a hole, and this is the existence one has. First, one must become conscious, well-knit, individualized being who exists in himself, by himself, independent of all his surroundings, who can hear anything, read anything, see anything without changing. He receives from outside only what he wants to receive. He automatically refuses all that is not in conformity with his plan, and nothing can leave an imprint on him unless he agrees to receive the imprint. Then one begins to become an individuality. When one is an individuality, one can offer it, make an offering of it. For unless one possesses something, one cannot give it. But first one must be, then afterwards one can give oneself. So, as long as one does not exist, one can give nothing. And then mother says, and for the separative ego to disappear, as you say, one must be able to give oneself entirely, totally, without reservation. And to be able to give oneself, one must first exist. And to exist, one must be individualized. If your body were not made in the rigid form, it is, for it is terribly rigid, isn't it? Well, if at all, they were not so fixed. If you had no skin, here like this solid, if externally you were the reflection of what you are in the vital and mental fields, it would be worse than being a jellyfish. Everything would fuse into everything else like this. Oh, what a mess. That is why it was first necessary to give a very rigid form. Afterwards, we complain about it. We say the physical is fixed, it is a nuisance. It lacks plasticity, it lacks suppleness, it hasn't that fluidity which can merge into the divine. But this was absolutely necessary, for without this, if you simply went out of your body, most of you can't do it, because a vital being is hardly more individualized than the physical. Or if you came out of your body and went into the vital world, you see that all things are interminglable, they are mixed, they divide. All kinds of vibrations, currents of forces come and go, struggle and try to destroy one another, take possession of each other, absorb each other, throw out each other, and so it goes on. But it is very difficult to find a real personality in all of this. These are forces, moments, desires, vibrations. These are individualities, these are personalities, but these are powers too. People who are individualized in the world are either heroes or devils. And now in the mind, there is a silence. If only you become conscious of your physical mind in itself. Some people have it here, like a public square, because everything comes in, goes across, passes, comes back. All ideas go there, enter at one place, leave by another. Some of them here, some of them there. It is like a public square, not very organized, for usually ideas meet and knock at one another. There are all accidents of all kinds. But then one becomes aware. What can I call my mind? What is in my mind? One needs years of very attentive, very careful, very reasonable, very coherent work, organization, selection, construction, in order to succeed simply in forming simply this little thing, one's own way of thinking.